Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. Training camp is in full swing, and we're still in West Virginia. The pads came on Monday, and we'll be back on Thursday. The length and competitiveness of practice has increased. The rain messed with the schedule, and we talked to the owners, GM, and Mike Vrabel. Here to discuss all of it, as always, is Dave Chudowsky of the WKYC Morning News. How's it going, Chud?
I'm all right, Scott. So basically nothing going on down
Yeah, it's a lot of boring days down here in White Sulphur Springs.
there. Yeah, no question. I'm doing well. I am not down there. I am here in the great city of Cleveland, Ohio, among the Olympics. It's always a busy time when you have Browns training camp and the Olympics being NBC station.
Yeah.
A lot going on there. But before we get into the meat of this, I just let everyone know kind of where we are schedule wise. How many days are left? Are we in pads yet? Has there been hitting? You had mentioned the rain. You've had to change the schedule a couple days. Just kind of give everyone an idea of where we're at.
So I'm pretty sure today's Wednesday when we're taping this, Chud. It's you lose track, but let's go with today's Wednesday. The Browns just have a walkthrough today, so there's no media availability. I think they were going to do some team bonding stuff as well. The pads came on, or they got here Thursday, so they went Thursday, Friday, Saturday, off day Sunday. Pads on Monday, but it's a first name pad, so it's more of an acclimation thing. They didn't do any offense versus defense. The only real contact was a little bit of special teams work. Tuesday, and I'm trying to keep track of it. So Monday, they also had to move practice up a couple of hours because of rain was coming, and then they wound up still getting caught in the rain, and they had to go to the turf field instead of the grass fields. And then Tuesday, they were in shells and not pads, but it was the most competitive practice of camp. Couple 7-on-7 sessions, including a red zone. There's an 11-on-11 period. And they had to move that practice too. They moved it from the morning. Like we went out there, supposed to start at 10:30, and just as they were taking the field, the skies began to open up. So they moved the practice. They did walkthrough first, and then moved the practice until 2:30. And it was a good decision because by then the fields had dried enough. They were still wet, but they dried enough that they could practice on the grass, and they were able to get in a lot of work, and it was a competitive practice. And then,
So now,
so to finish your question, so Thursday, so we're back at it
yep.
Thursday, padded practice. Friday, quick practice, may or may not be pads. And then the team gets on the plane, flies home, off day Saturday, training camp in Berea starts Sunday, fans allowed.
True or false, you'll be on a golf course on Saturday.
You know what, Chud? I'm going to go false because, and maybe I'll be able to hit balls. I don't know. I had to turn down an invitation for an outing just because I haven't been home in like 10 days. I figure I should probably spend some quality time with my wife, with my dog. We're going to be dog sitting. I think I'm needed at home. Plus, I'm not going to have any clean clothes at all because they're all with me in West Virginia. I'm going to have to do laundry all day Saturday.
All good answers. All good answers. And that's why you're married. So I get it totally. Yeah, no. It's a long week for you. Great job down there. Let's get right into it. Let's start. I think we start with Deshaun Watson, right? I mean, I know there's a lot of ways we could start this, but let's go Deshaun Watson and let's talk about him on the field and unfortunately, off the field with some comments he made. Let's start with him. Which way do you want to go? You want to go on the field first, or do you want to go off?
Let's go off.
Let's go off. So I don't even feel like it was provoked, right, Scott? And he obviously has an issue and brought up things that, kind of we thought weren't, let's just say, no one's ever going to think that the Deshaun Watson past is ever completely put away. But I think as far as the media goes and like dealing with it, you kind of thought we weren't really dealing with this anymore. And by that, I mean, what he went through in the past and how he feels about it.
Yeah, it was interesting because so we taped whenever we did the podcast last week, right? But it was before Watson talked because Watson talked Friday. And yeah, you're exactly right, Chud. I mean, you're right. He came to Cleveland with all that baggage isn't a strong enough word, but let's call it baggage. right? He had the more than 24 sexual misconduct and allegations from the massage therapy sessions, right? And that caused him the 11-game suspension, and it divided the fan base, and it put the Browns in a bad light, all those things. And none of those things have gone away, right? He settled a bunch of them. I think there's one or two still out there, but there's been no real updates with them for a long time now. So the point is, like, we quit asking about it is the media. I quit even referring to why he was suspended, because I think everybody who reads my stuff knows why he was suspended, and it felt like it was just not piling on, but it was unnecessary anymore, right? And it takes up space in your writing and whatever. So it had just been, if you had to refer to his missed time, it was suspension, and that was it. And then he just got a question about his mindset or approach coming into year 3 with Cleveland, and went into this thing about blocking out the BS and referred to how people talked about his character, and that bothered him, and talked about how he likes to be liked and everybody likes to be liked. And there was a defiant tone to much of the interview. Not all of it. There were some times where he was friendly and smiled, but there's a defiant tone that he, in my opinion, brought to it. It wasn't part of the question. It was an innocent question. And then later I asked him, I talked about what's your motivation for the season, and he gave, just to be the best I can be or whatever. And I said, is any part of that proving the people wrong who rank you low, right? We've talked about it, Chud. Yep. I saw a ranking where he's 23rd, I think, in the league, and another where he's 24th, and he's behind Baker Mayfield, and he's behind Derek Carr and Russell Wilson, right? Guys that he should be ahead of, right? I know I'm not saying he's played to be ahead of them, but if you look at the league, you would want your quarterback that you're paying $46 million a year to be ahead of that. And I just said, is that part of the motivation? And he said, no, I don't have to prove anything to anybody. And I'm paraphrasing. And then at the end, he kind of leans down toward the tape recorders, and I didn't even hear him. I'm only 5 feet away. And he said, he goes, I give 2 Fs about what people think. It's like, okay, and that's fine, but like, he didn't have to go there, right? And it was just a weird way for him to start camp. It just really was. And it brought back discussion of the sexual misconduct allegations and the reason for the suspension. And it inspired Jason Lloyd of The Athletic to write a column, and Mike Freeman of USA Today to write a column ripping Watson. And I don't think any of that happens if Watson doesn't make it about this. And he did.
Yeah. And I mean, and you have Joe Flacco from last year and all the good feelings the fans had with him. And it almost makes you just think that it's, the only way Deshaun Watson's going to cure all of this is to take this team to the Super Bowl. And I'm not even going to say win it. Just take them there. I mean, it's either that or he does some heroic thing, like, saves a family from a burning building. I mean, I don't know what the guy's got to do, but it's clearly, bringing this up like he did. How many times have I remember last year just talking about, or even Jameis Winston, about how I would rather listen to Jameis Winston talk every week than Deshaun Watson. I mean, his interviews are just not ear-pleasing at all.
No,
regardless of how it goes.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it, Chud. I do. And the Super Bowl is interesting, and that probably cures a bunch of ills, and whether or not it should, that's a different discussion. But yeah, that's probably the only way to really change his image, right? Or if they, go on a run of 6 playoff trips without it or with him, right? And he becomes a guy and he stays out of trouble, whatever. But in this moment, it certainly doesn't feel that way, especially because he's only played 12 games in 2 years and hasn't been that good when he's played, right? So he's got a lot to prove, and I don't think he's built up. I don't want to say any. He hasn't built up much goodwill with this fan base for everything he did before he got here, how he handled that situation. In my opinion, he hasn't shown enough remorse. He's really defensive about it. And So you have that part of it, and then it's the lack of on the field availability and success that, why would he have won anyone over? I guess is my point.
Yeah. It's amazing thing when you bring up the rankings too. I mean, Scott, you go back to his last year where he played um, with Houston,
Yeah,
where he
2020
actually
Houston.
was, yeah, when he was having, I mean, Scott, you could argue he's one of the best, maybe top three quarterbacks in the game.
Yeah, I think he was in the top 5 for sure. So I do,
Yeah.
right? And now you're looking, and now we talk about, okay, if he can play like a top 12, if he can play like a top 15, the Browns have a chance, right? Because the rest of the roster is so good. There's no talk about him being in the top 5. I mean, none at all, right? And when you look at those lists, to me, that's when it's a bit jarring when you see, well, he shouldn't be below Baker Mayfield. He shouldn't be below Derek Carr, who struggled, right? Russell Wilson, Denver couldn't wait to get rid of him, right? And and I'm not saying these rankings are perfect. And I would have, if I ranked them, or if you asked me who I'd rather have Watson above Mayfield. I'd rather have Watson above Wilson. I think Derek Carr's an interesting situation. He's been hurt a lot. Well, so is Watson, right? But that's an interesting discussion. And we had one of those, just a friendly one with the media that I've been hanging out with. Like, what quarterbacks would you take Watson over? And the list is not as long as it should be for a guy you traded 5 draft picks, 3 first rounders, and are paying $46 million a year guaranteed through 2026.
Well, Scott, I mean, let's get to on the field. There's probably a lot of people listening. They're like, who cares about his image? If he throws touchdowns and wins games, that's what we need him to do. So let's talk about on the field then, and let's talk about how he's looked down there. First of all, I think it was Monday. Was there a little bit of a scare thinking he was possibly hurt?
Yeah, it was an interesting thing, Chud. I did not see it. It was they'd moved down to the lower field, and because interviews are going to be in the upper field, we got in the shuttle, we went up, and you could still see down, but we're far away, and there's 90 guys on the field, right? So I think while at the time what we're going to talk about, I was watching Myles Garrett. He came out. He hasn't practiced yet. He's running. I'm watching Myles Garrett doing his running, and I think at the same time was Mary Kay saw it. He made a throw in, it was just the quarterbacks working by themselves. Made a throw toward, they have these nets and there's targets in the nets. It wound up being short. It kind of hopped in and he took off his pads. The rest of the quarterbacks took a couple more reps. And according to Mary Kay, who I've talked to about this, it just looked different, right? It just looked a little strange. And given the shoulder injuries he had, she decided to write about how it happened, how it looked, right? And the Browns said it was no big deal, and she didn't I don't think she made any assumptions. She just said, "Hey, this is how practice ended." So that was Monday. Tuesday, he comes out, throws in team drills, throws on 7-7. So that just must have been how his practice ended, right? The last throw happened to be a bad throw. He took off his pads, and that was, he knew that was going to be his last throw. So he practiced again yesterday. He's thrown all 5 practices, which is a good sign, because in the OTAs, minicamp, it was strictly every other day. He's thrown in team drills, which he did not do in OTAs and minicamp. So those are all positive signs. He's still on this trajectory. He's not at 100% of his reps yet. For example, I'm watching yesterday. He does his normal team stuff. Then they go to, again, that quarterbacks only throwing into the targets. And he does a footwork part, but doesn't make the throw. While Jameis Winston, Tyler Huntley, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson make the throws. So he's on a little bit of a pitch count, but he's better than he was in minicamp, and it's just part of their plan to make sure the shoulder's fine week 1. Now, how he's looked has been inconsistent. There have been good moments. He had a good red zone drill to finish practice yesterday. He had a rough start to the first 7-on-7 drill, which wasn't red zone. Couldn't get guys open. It felt like he couldn't find open guys. And maybe that's because the defense was really good. But holding on to the ball, trying to extend the play, and there's no rush. So, it's designed to get the ball out quick. Then there's been a lot of short passes, which, that's fine if that's how the offense is going to be, but a bunch of short passes. He tried to go deep a couple times in that 7-on-7 drill, and they were bad passes. He overthrew Elijah Moore, who was open deep. He wasn't close to Michael Woods on a deep post. Double coverage, almost got intercepted. So there were some iffy moments, and then, like I said, he finished strong. So I think that you can say that overall, for the first week of camp, he's been up and down. And, I don't know if there's because he didn't throw a bunch in the offseason, or that's just, the quarterback he happens to be right now is an inconsistent quarterback, and there's no Jerry Jeudy, which doesn't help. There wasn't David Njoku for a couple practices, but I just don't think he is where he wants to be from a overall, right? It's throwing on target, it's throwing on time. Maybe it's even reading the defenses. I think he's still, he's got a bunch of time before the season starts, but I think there's room for improvement. Too many balls hitting the ground when they shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. Next two things on Watson. Let's make it quick so we can move on. We've spent a lot of time here, but just quickly, do you think we're dissecting him too much right now?
That's a great question, Chud. Probably, but I think there's good reason for it because we don't know if he's going to be that 2020 guy that you mentioned. And you want to see, if you're the Browns, you want to see him have really, really good practices, right? And string them together. And, maybe it's not a fair comparison to talk about a Pat Mahomes or Peyton Manning or Aaron Rodgers, right? But those guys are really good and really accurate day in, day out. And we just haven't seen that, I would say, from Watson throughout his tenure here. And he's coming off the shoulder. So if you're the Browns, you want to see that. So I understand the magnification of it, but maybe it's too early and maybe we shouldn't be making any conclusions, if that makes sense.
And lastly, and we could get more into what Andrew Berry talked about, but just in the Watson part of this, he seems happy with him, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, he does. The Haslams do. Kevin Stefanski said all the right things. His teammates, talk highly of him. David Njoku, he's a beast. So, yeah, the organization is behind him, and it has been, and he's had their support. And, part of that is because I believe that they think he can still be good, right? That when they got him, they saw all these characteristics, and they think those are all still there. He's only 28 years old. The other reality is they don't have a choice. They are tied to this guy, and they can't bail on him now.
All right, so that was Friday when you talked to Watson. We had taped the last podcast Friday morning before that. You also heard from Myles Garrett, right? So let's quickly talk about him before we move on to all the other big hitters that you talked to. Anything really stand out? It sounds like, he wants to make a statement.
Yeah. First of all, he hasn't practiced yet, which is kind of interesting. I don't think it's concerning at all. I've seen him run. I've seen him do drills. He's engaged. I think the Browns are just being extra, extra careful with him. He had a little tweak of the hamstring at the end of minicamp, right? The last day of minicamp. So I think the Browns are just being real careful with him. But yeah, talking to Myles, I always enjoy it. I thought it was interesting. He called the AFC a slaughterhouse and knows that they got right, knows that they have their work cut out for him there. Talked about playing Dallas in the opener. He's from Arlington, Texas, right, which is the home of the Cowboys. So I want to get his quote right here. He says, "It's Dallas, it's home. I don't plan on losing. That's it." So he's already thinking about that matchup. And then just coming off that Defensive Player of the Year, what's next for him? He said he spent time in the offseason watching the other elite pass rushers in the NFL: Micah Parsons, Trey Hendrickson, Max Crosby, Nick Bosa, TJ Watt, because we always talk about how many double and triple teams he gets. So he looks at he went back and watched film and looked at how they handle those things, the chips, the double teams, all that, to see how he can beat it. And because, that's not what's missing from his game, but that's what he has to deal with all the time. And if he's going to get more than the 14 sacks he had last year, more than the 16, the two before that, he's going to have to figure out a way to not just win when he gets a rare one-on-one, but continue and get even better at handling all the extra attention that he receives.
moving on to Saturday, then the Haslams spoke, right? That was Saturday because then Sunday was an off day, correct?
Correct. That was a busy one.
Yeah.
Yeah, they talked Watson, they talked stadium.
Hmm.
So I guess the stadium, no decision has been made, right? I mean, you're trying to break down the headlines here. No decision has been made. Um, Feels like they want the dome, but and they didn't come out and say, but Andrew Berry did the other day. He said he prefers a dome. But any solution is a good solution, right? It's real issues that are being determined. It's not just, hey, would you rather be in a dome or not? It's if you renovate the stadium, it's 1.1 billion. If you do the dome, it's 2.4 just for the dome in the surrounding area. Like that's not even it's more for when you talk about the whole project, right? So it's 2.4 for the dome. That's 1.3 million extra. That's $650 million of government money that they would be asking. So you have to figure out where you're going to get that money, right? So they don't know which way it's going to go. They talked about how their relationship with the mayor of Cleveland's still good, and they had dinner, and they want it to be a win-win, whether they stay downtown or they move to Brook Park. D. Haslam did say that nothing scientific, but from their feedback they get from fans is fans would prefer the dome. And they're trying to, according to the Haslams, they're trying to solve problems at the stadium. And it's the egress, the ingress, and the parking, right? It's not easy for people to get in and out, not easy for people to get there. And their point is, or one of the things they said is, even if they do this giant renovation, they can make those things better, but they can't solve all the problems. And it felt like their pitch for a dome, in that if you build a new dome, you can solve all those problems at the beginning, right? So, I feel like they want the dome. It's just a matter of the funding has to work for the dome to get done.
Scott, you're there. I mean, you see what they say in person, and you just said it feels like they want their. I'm just going to put you on the spot. Your opinion. Do you think the dome's going to happen? Is that the way it's going to go?
I'm going to say yes.
Yeah.
I think they find a way to get the money that they need. And I'm not saying that's the right thing, right? But I do think they figure out, and maybe it winds up being that they take on more than 50-50. And, Jimmy got asked directly, well, why don't you just fund it yourself? And he said that if you look around the professional sports, that's not how it happens lately. It's a partnership with the, public and private. And he said it's just not, I'm paraphrasing, fiscally doable in Northeast Ohio. The way the finances work, whatever it is, he doesn't think he can or would not want to take on all the funding. But maybe if you go 70-30, you can get not the taxpayers, but you can get the city and the county and the state, right, to get behind that. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, a lot of details. But if I were going to bet, I would bet the dome, but I don't think it's by any means a done deal.
Yeah, but listening to Andrew Berry, though, it sounds like he definitely wants it.
Right. It does. And it feels that it's an organizational thing, right? That enough people inside the organization want the dome. It's just a matter of, can they get there, right? And I thought it was interesting. Barry said, hey, we play these guys to be athletes, not gladiators, right? Like, I think he prefers football in a dome, right? It doesn't have to be dome, but in good conditions. And obviously, in Northeast Ohio, you don't always have good conditions. And Barry said he also thinks the fans benefit from the dome, right? It's a better experience for fans, and I think many fans would agree with that. Which is why the dome. I think the dome, and I haven't done a scientific survey either, but I do think there's a lot of backing for the dome among the fans.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's shifted a lot because I don't feel that was necessarily the case 10, 20 years ago, but I feel like it is now. Or maybe I'm wrong. That's the
No,
vibe, the sense I get.
I think you're right about that, Chuck. I think there's diehards and there's people that want grass and
Yeah.
don't want it to leave this downtown, right? I think there's a bunch of different factors in play here, But I think you're 100% right that there's way more people now than a decade ago that would say don't.
Yeah, no question. And let's be honest. I mean, that stadium we have now, it's not like it's one of the best stadiums in the NFL. I mean, it was rushed to put together, and obviously we know why, to get our team back. But have you ever been in there and just thought, man, this is one of the best stadiums in the NFL?
No, no, and I'm sure I know that's part of it, right? It's keeping up with the Joneses, and I'm sure it ranks. I mean, I've been to just about every stadium, and there's new ones going up in Tennessee, and that one I thought that was a good stadium, right? Like, it's got to rank in the bottom, whatever, eighth, off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does that mean you need to spend $2 billion on a new one? Well, I mean, we could have that argument, right? Like, we can play in a crappy stadium, right? Like, nothing's precluding you from doing that. And I wouldn't say it's a crappy stadium. It's just not state-of-the-art stadium, right? So those are the discussions, but the NFL has certainly moved to, almost every 2 decades, you get a new stadium, and it's really cool and it's state-of-the-art. And that's where the Browns want to go. Now it's just a matter of figuring out the money.
One last thing with the Haslams expectations, it's just they've had to answer that question year after year after year, but finally they're in a spot where it's like, all right, our expectations, we actually believe, there's they always have high expectations, but now there's something to come off of with the playoff appearance, right? And the extension, they finally have a head coach and a general manager that they could feel confident about.
Yeah, and I think I asked Jimmy about that, and I said, how significant is this that you were able to land on these coach GM that you don't have to fire every year, right? And now we're going to be here for foreseeable future, and it's year 5. And he said, I think he said it was a relief to have them in place. And I just thought that was interesting that instead of, he could have been, it's great and we got it right and blah, blah, blah. I'm looking up the quote right now. He goes, I guess we'd say it's relief that they performed well, right? So, I know that they liked the hires when they made them, but you just never know, right? They liked the Hugh Jackson hire. They liked whoever they hired before that, right? Or Freddie Kitchens hire after Hugh. So it's just interesting that I think the way he phrased it, the relief. And then even when you talk expectations, and I do appreciate this about the Haslams, they're not getting ahead of themselves. They were scarred so severely by the losing early and the dysfunction and the turmoil and the turnover that, they know, and he goes, we know as hard as anyone how hard it is we know as well as anyone how hard it is to win in this league. So, yeah, they feel good about the roster. Yeah, they feel good about Watson. Yeah, they feel good about the coach and the staff and all that. You still need to play well. You still need to avoid injuries, right? Like, nothing's a given. And the next step for the Haslams, and this is what Jimmy said, was winning over the long term, right? They win, they went to the first playoffs, missed for 2 years, go back to the playoffs. You had to have some consistency there to feel like you really did, in fact, get over the hump.
Yeah, great point. So that brings us to Monday. Andrew Berry spoke. We've already talked about what he had to say about Watson in the stadium. Anything else really stand out with Andrew Berry?
Trying to think, Chud. I don't think so. Andrew Berry doesn't say a ton of stuff. He was good talking about Mike Vrabel. I know we'll talk about Vrabel for a second or in a minute. Talked about Watson. He's a big year, admits that he needs to be available, right? That was one of the points that Barry made. Grateful to have the extension. Just looking up my.
I would say basically, if we don't really remember too many headlines, that's probably about it.
Right. I mean, he was optimistic about the injuries, right? Guys are going to be back. Jed Wills, Jed Conklin, even Greg Newsome and Dalvin Tomlinson, who had surgeries. He said it's realistic to think they could be back by week 1. Talked a little about Amari Cooper. Didn't slam the door on an extension for Cooper, but I certainly get the feeling that the restructure means they're not in any hurry and they want to see how 2024 plays out.
Yeah, that was going to be my next thing was injuries. So you kind of hit on them. Is there anything? How about Nick Chubb? Scott, chances, what week do you think we could see Nick Chubb?
I think what's realistic is week 4. And again, he hasn't practiced once. When I saw him do those sprints, Chud, and I think that was Friday, I was blown away. Like, he's running explosively, probably not as fast as he used to, but full effort, explosion. It's like, oh my gosh, like, it was startling. And then you start thinking, oh my gosh, can he be ready week 1? Now, you get away from it a little bit. You talk to Barry, you talk to Stefanski, they calm me down. So I don't think fans should expect week 1, but I think sometime in October seems realistic to me, assuming there's no setbacks.
Well, and that's coming off watching him, do the squats in the video.
Right.
You see the sprint and you're like, man.
No, that's exactly right, Chad. You start to pile that together, right? You start to go, oh my gosh, could it be, right? Could it really be faster? And maybe it is, right? But I know for sure that the organization is pumping the brakes on expectations, right? They do not want to get ahead of themselves on Nick Chubb because you have to remember how serious this injury was.
Is there any injury right now where you're starting to think to yourself, you're a little bit concerned where, you know how it is at the beginning of camp, you're like, well, you even said about Myles Garrett, they're just being extra cautious. But do you think there's an injury right now where we're going to look back and be like, well, we were saying, well, it's just the start of camp and they're, just, working them in slow. Is there someone you're, maybe getting a little bit concerned about?
It's a good question. I thought we would see Jed Wills practicing by now, and we have seen him on the side, which is, a step toward that. It's too early to be super concerned. Jack Conklin, we haven't seen yet. So yeah, I mean, those two guys, like, I think Wills will be fine for week 1. Maybe it was never realistic to think that Conklin would be ready for week 1. But I have doubts. I have questions about that now. And then real quick, Jerry Jeudy, I think Jerry Jeudy's fine. Like, he passed his physical, but he hasn't practiced yet. And he does a little in installation, right? They run the routes, but he hasn't practiced. And my concern really there isn't, will he be ready to go week 1? It's, he hasn't gotten a lot of reps. And he hasn't got a lot of reps with Deshaun Watson because Jeudy missed time in the offseason. So he's a new guy, pay him big money extension. I think if you're the Browns, it'd just be nice to see him out there and not miss so much time and get some practicing.
Yeah, Jeudy was the one that I was maybe thinking, hey, when are we going to see this guy, Scott?
Right. And I think that's realistic. And I don't think it's like a major injury, right? Like I said, because he passed that physical, but they're being really cautious with him, and it is costing him practice time. And I know they have a plan and all that, but I think ideally, right, you want your number 2 receiver to be out there catching passes from your quarterback.
How's Amari Cooper looking?
Looks good. He's so smooth. Yeah, I think he looks good. I don't think the missed minicamp has affected him at all. So yeah, no, he looks good up there.
Overall, just as a team, it's so hard to really break that down in camp. But you said they had a good practice yesterday, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of competition. I think you look out at, and we haven't seen, like, you don't see we haven't seen a lot of team pass rush, right? So that's tough to, even when they're in 11-on-11, right? Myles Garrett's not out there, and Zadarius Smith has missed the last couple of days. So you don't get the full look, and you know that they're not going hard after Deshaun Watson, and they haven't been in pads, right? So you have to take it with a grain of salt. What I feel really comfortable saying is, even without Greg Newsome II out there, and even Cam Mitchell, who practiced yesterday but wasn't in team drills, the backup nickelback coming off a leg injury, you look out and you see Denzel Ward and Martin Emerson Jr., and you see JOK, and you know that Myles Garrett's there, and you got Grant Delpit. Right? You see a lot of pieces on defense. And sometimes when Watson's not finding guys open, it's because Denzel Ward and Martin Emerson Jr. are playing really good coverage on the outside guys, right? So I think that's something the Browns will be able to hang their hats on. I know the schedule's a lot tougher. I know they play great quarterbacks this year. I think this defense is going to be really good again and has a chance to be better than it was last year. The stats may not look like that, but assuming Newsome comes back, assuming Dalvin Tomlinson comes back, I just think they have a ton of pieces. And it starts with 95 and then 21 and 23.
We'll be talking about that, no question, a lot. Let's finish up here with Mike Vrabel. He kind of stole the show. Was that yesterday or
Yeah,
was it yesterday he was up there? Yeah, that was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, he's funny. I mean, it's funny watching him, or funny. Sprints with Jameis Winston, right? Like every time the quarterbacks flip the field, which, I mean, he's going all out. And Winston, Winston's 20 years younger than him, and Vrabel's keeping up with him. He's hands-on with David Njoku. I was paying extra close attention yesterday, and he was working. The tight ends were working on getting separation from the guys covering, right? Like shaking off, like knocking that arm away. And Njoku would do it, and Vrabel would go up and like grab Njoku's arm, and it was really working on the technique, working on how you have to do it. And then they tried to put it into this drill, and Vrabel had him run the route again because he spent a lot of time working with tight ends. And he had Njoku redo it because he didn't think he did it well enough. So you just see this old, and Njoku said it, old-fashioned, old-school coach with a ton of energy, a ton of unbelievable experience as a player, as a coach, right? And I think he's a huge asset for this organization. And I wrote it in the story that, let's say the Browns go on a run and get to the Super Bowl. Like, I don't think it's a leap to say that Mike Vrabel will be one of those kind of hidden ingredients to get them there, because I think he can have that kind of an influence and an impact. And he's only going to be here a year, right? I expect him to go get a head coaching job, but he can have that kind of impact. And I think we're seeing it on a daily basis. And he talked about getting back more hands-on, right? Head coach, you have to be CEO, right? It's take big picture views, because he's out there coaching these guys one-on-one, and it does recharge the batteries.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I was going to ask you if you thought that this would be the only year and he'd be a head coach next year somewhere. So you answered that there. Yeah, no question. A lot of people think, hey, if Ryan Day doesn't beat Michigan, he'll end up at Ohio State.
Yeah, that's interesting. College, there's so much you have to deal with in college these days, Chud.
Yeah,
with the NIL and with the constant transfer portal. I've not talked to Vrabel about this. I just think it'd be hard to leave the NFL to go back to college.
Yeah, no question. Now, didn't he say he's not going to be part of any game day scenarios, right?
Yeah, he said he's not going to have a role on game day. That he'll go to some. Now, he's been here every day. But maybe you get to the season, you get in a routine. I think he still lives in Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken. So, you're back and forth, right? I think he's got a kid still in college. Like, I think you have to juggle some other stuff. He's only a consultant, right? He's not a full-time coach. So on game day, I don't think he's going to be on the sideline. I don't know if he'll be in the booth. He said he'll be there more as a supporter. So yeah, he's not going to be in Stefanski's ear, giving him tips during game day. It'll be more preparation and then looking ahead to the next opponent.
I think that says a lot about Stefanski too, that you can bring a guy like this in and not feel any pressure. And granted, all right, 2-time coach of the year, how could you feel pressure? The pressure's always on, regardless, I think. And, I think that says a lot about you. And that's what makes great teams and teamwork, is you can bring in and put your ego aside, or put any fears that, he could, come and cost you your job to try to make the team better. I think that says a lot about Kevin.
Chud, I completely agree. We saw a little bit of that last year with Jim Schwartz, right? It's a big personality. You bring in former head coach. Vrabel's even bigger. Now, Stefanski has some security built up, some leverage, so to speak, built up with those two coaches of the year. But yeah, I think there's plenty of coaches that would not do that, would not bring in a guy like Mike Vrabel. And Stefanski went and sought it out. right? I think that does say something about it. But you're right, because I still get things on Twitter. I think I wrote about him yesterday, or X, and somebody's like, the next head coach, right? It's like, no, Mike Vrabel's not going to be the next head coach of the Browns, right? But on the outside, there is that perception to whatever degree, given what a big name and the resume that Mike Vrabel has.
Yeah. Now, he said that he's eaten some dog bones in the past. Scott, can you say the same thing? Did you spend a part of your life eating dog bones?
You know what, Chud? I did not. I remember one time, it was, I want to say the drive or the fumble game, right? One of those playoff runs. And my cousin ate one, and I said, no, I think I'm good.
Yeah. I think I've thrown one, but I don't think I've eaten.
I believe that.
Yeah.
A rabble rouser?
Yeah, I think I'm just making that up for ratings. So, all right, well, that's it for me. Unless you have anything else, I think, well, you got Thursday and Friday. You come back Friday, and then we'll get back in, let's see, they're off on Saturday. So is Sunday the first day in Berea?
Yeah, Sunday in Berea, and I think they're like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday in Berea before another off day. Yeah. So, yeah, it feels like, right, you get out, we're going to get out of West Virginia, and it feels like, okay, a little respite, but it's not, because then they're just back to training camp in Berea, and that's always a grind too, right? And I think the players will feel the same way. It's, okay, this was a nice excursion, now we're going to go back, and it's business as usual. And, I mean, there's a preseason game a week on Saturday, Chud. I looked at the schedule today. I couldn't believe that. Yeah.
I thought the same thing. The Hall of Fame game snuck up on me.
It's like tomorrow, right?
Yeah. I mean, it sneaks up on you, and before you know it, I think is that a 4:00 start with is it the Packers, right?
Yeah, it's 4:25, I think. Yeah,
4:25.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we'll be breaking down football games here soon.
I know. How about that, huh?
Yeah. There you go.
Well, thank you,
All
Chud.
right. Have a safe trip back, man.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Chud, as always. We'll talk again next week. Thanks, everybody, for listening. This has been another episode of the Zone Coverage Podcast, and you can read all my work at brownzone.com. Thanks.